Good evening. My name is Bill Ballinger. I'm editor of a newsletter, Inside Michigan Politics. I'm a charter member, I believe, of the Michigan Political History Society, this august group assembled here this evening, which has been the repository for so many great speakers over the past few years. Tonight we are really lucky. We have a native daughter of Michigan, born and brought up in my hometown, Flint, Michigan, home of the Flintstones. She was born in the old women's hospital, like former Lieutenant Governor Jim Brickley, and like me. Women's hospital doesn't exist anymore, but Sara went to school part of her youth at Bentley School, and then, unfortunately, her father, who worked for GM, was transferred several times and places to Rochester, New York, and to the Bloomfield Hills area. But Sara's older sister, Sue Fitzgerald, is a graduate of Flint Central High School. So there's a big Michigan connection there. And the big thing about our speaker tonight, our author, is that Sara Fitzgerald was the first female editor-in-chief of the Michigan Daily. That was really something. So she was a pioneer in journalism for women as an undergraduate in college, and it kind of fits right into what I think she sensed when she first saw Elly Peterson. And if I'm not mistaken, I think it was on TV in 1964 during the Republican National Convention, and Sara was just a 13-year-old schoolgirl, Bloomfield Hills, and she was awed to see a prominent woman on the national political scene, a woman from Michigan, a Republican, Elly Peterson, because in those days you didn't see that very often. In fact, you never saw that. And Elly Peterson was first in just about everything she did for the Republican Party and for women in politics in Michigan. And Sara Fitzgerald was kind of there at the very beginning when Elly Peterson was just hitting her stride. And Sara Fitzgerald went on to a very illustrious career in journalism herself at the Washington Post, at a number of other newspapers. And she took on the assignment of writing a book I think that is very, very important. And that is a biography of Elly Peterson, who was somebody who came out of nowhere in the mid-50s, a secretary in an office in Eaton County adjacent to Lansing, and onward and upward over the next 10 or 12 years became a national Republican female figure. And Sara Fitzgerald has recreated all this in her book. She's done a great job, and we are so honored and happy to have her with us this evening to talk about it, and I know you got a lot of questions. I'll just give one little quote of Elly's that maybe will steal Sara's thunder a little bit, although it's so well known I'm not going to be giving anything away. The introduction that Elly Peterson always had to put up with, and I heard it with my own ears back in the 60s by Governor George Romney at that time, was Elly Peterson looks like a woman, thinks like a man, and works like a dog. And Elly Peterson had to listen to that over and over and over again. Now, can you imagine George's son, Mitt, running for president today, introducing a woman that way? I don't think so. Thank you very much. Sara Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Bill, for that nice introduction. It's a great privilege and pleasure for me to be with you tonight. First, I want to thank Linda Cleary for her help in setting up this event, and I want to commend the Michigan Political History Society for your commitment to preserving this part of the history of our state. In the course of writing my book, I was able to make use of several of the videotaped oral histories in your James Blanchard collection, including, of course, the interview that Bill Ballinger did with Elly Peterson back in 1995. These are indeed a gift, not only to historians, but to future generations of Michiganders. It's gratifying for me to be speaking here tonight, but it's also a little bit daunting. It's daunting because I'm talking about a woman who was, by all accounts I reviewed, a very good public speaker. Joyce Braithwaite Brickley, her close friend and political protege, described Elly Peterson's speeches this way: "She dealt in reality, but had a way of making an audience laugh along the way. But in the end, she really came back on point and slammed an audience. She wasn't the delicate type. I think this made her lightness, followed by powerful instructions, all the more powerful." Everyone who knew Peterson called her Elly, that is, if they didn't call her mother. The headline writers at Michigan newspapers in the mid-1960s said Elly did this and Elly did that, and their readers knew exactly who they were talking about. And while I'm sure that many of you knew her as Elly, and I don't think for a minute that she would mind if I called her that, I'm not going to use that diminutive, familiar form tonight, because I think Elly Peterson deserves to be taken very seriously. Now, you would never say that Peterson was guilty of taking herself too seriously. She was introduced as a speaker so many times during her career that by the end of it, she had developed a set speech built largely on amusing anecdotes about the ways in which she had been introduced. At one women's club luncheon, the president turned to her and asked, "Elly, do you want to speak now or let them enjoy their luncheon a little longer?" At a meeting of a young Republicans club, the membership chairman preceded Peterson's speech with a rousing sales pitch that concluded, "And if we get more members, we can get better speakers." At a Rotary Club, a district chairman summed up by saying, "Why, there isn't a man in this audience who isn't familiar with her." In Kansas, an MC wound up by saying, "And I give you the biggest woman in the Republican Party, Elly Peterson." In recent weeks, I've wondered whether Chris Christie has ever heard that one. A favorite introduction was provided by her good friend, Wendell Hobbs, the Republican leader from Ann Arbor. He said, "There goes one of the finest women that ever walked the streets." The audience laughed, and Hobbs apologized. But Peterson was quick to reply that it's the nicest thing said about me lately. She actually incorporated the quote into the subtitle of the memoir she later wrote and published for her family members. But there were other times when it was probably more challenging for Peterson to keep smiling as she sat on the dais. She recalled one occasion when she delivered a speech at a men's club, and she and her sister were the only women present. The MC turned to her and said, "And now, Mrs. Peterson, we hope you will not give us your bra speech, as that only covers 2 points, but instead launch into your girdle speech, as that covers everything." Bill described the quote that George Romney used a lot to introduce Elly. Romney, she recalled, thought he was being kind, but for years it was like waving a red flag in my face, and I always answered as politely as I could, "I think like men think they think." If I were introducing Elly Peterson as a speaker tonight, I would focus on her many firsts. She was the first woman to run for the U.S. Senate from Michigan. That was back in 1964, when there were only 2 women senators, both of whom had entered Congress when they were appointed to fill the seats of their late husbands. She was the first woman to chair a state Republican Party. In 1965, people around the country thought she was, in fact, the first woman to chair any state party. This was at a time when the chairman of the Republican National Committee would not permit a female vice chair to fill in if the male party chair could not attend the meetings. It was at a time when the Finance Committee of the Michigan Republican Party held its meetings at male-only clubs. In 1976, Peterson was recruited to be co-chair of ERA America, the coalition of dozens of national organizations that worked to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. And that same year, she served as deputy chairman of the President Ford Committee, which, according to my research, was at that time the highest professional job that a woman had ever held in a major presidential campaign. In recent months, I've often been asked what led me to write this book. I think the answer speaks to the importance that heroes and heroines can still play in our lives. As Bill mentioned, I grew up in Michigan, the child of parents who considered themselves to be moderate Republicans. Elly Peterson first came to my attention when I was watching television coverage of the 1964 Republican National Convention. That year, Peterson was about to step down from her first stint as assistant chairman of the Republican National Committee. She was running for the U.S. Senate, and she was about to become the first woman to address the Republican National Convention in prime time. On this particular afternoon, as Bill described, she was being interviewed